we have Genesis 39. Studying Genesis 39. And we had one verse talking about what happened to Joseph after he was sold into slavery until this chapter. One verse we had was Genesis 37:36, which said, the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. So we get a one-verse summary. This has happened. He's down with Potiphar. And now Genesis 39 picks up with, okay, what happens in Joseph's life now that he is with Potiphar in Egypt. So we covered in last week Judah and Tamar as well. That shows the Lord's faithfulness very strongly in providing Perez specifically through Tamar as in the line of Christ. And even with what happened to Er and Onan and the unrighteousness of Judah and the unrighteousness of Tamar, God still used it for his purposes and would still work out the kings of Judah and the line of Christ through this. So, do I have a volunteer to read Genesis 39, verses 1 through 4? Go ahead, Steve.
Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, the Egyptian, bought him out of land of Ishmaelites, which had brought down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord had made all that did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight. He served him. He made him overseer over his house, all that he had put into his hand.
So, if Genesis 39 ended here, we're almost at a happily ever after section. So Joseph goes down to Potiphar. He's a very high-ranking official. It says officer of Pharaoh, meaning he works directly with Pharaoh. He's directly responsible to Pharaoh. Well, what's he doing for Pharaoh? He's captain of the guard. Pharaoh's personal guard, and I guess the guards for whatever Pharaoh's buildings need to be guarded. Potiphar is the person in charge of that. He's basically the highest guy you can get in the military, right next to Pharaoh, and Joseph's under him. And we have then verse 2, that's not the most important part, of the Lord was with Joseph. This is a very, very common theme, as we've seen throughout all of Genesis. The Bible mentions the Lord being with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph very, very often, because it's always true. Well, what happens here? He was a prosperous man. God's blessing Joseph. What he's doing is prospering. He was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. We find out later he has a bunch of servants that work in his fields. Joseph being in the house means he's working more directly with Potiphar. He's not just one of the people hoeing the fields and such. He's in the house taking care of business matters and such. And apparently there's a lot of feedback, which, thank you, perfect. His master saw in verse 3, so now Potiphar is seen because Joseph's working in the house. Potiphar is able to observe what's happening. His master saw the Lord was with him. God's making his testimony very evident, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So the way God is working is very clear. It's not Joseph and his ability directly. It's God and his blessing that is with Joseph. And we see Potiphar, for all that you see in the story, positive and negative, he's very wise. When Potiphar sees this, in verse 4, Joseph found grace in his sight. When you see the word grace in the Old Testament, we're talking about favor. Potiphar regards Joseph favorably. He sees, look, his God is blessing him. His God's making everything he does to prosper. Obviously, that means he's doing the right thing. So Joseph finds grace in his sight. Potiphar favors him directly. The next line, so what did Potiphar do? And he served him. What that means is now Joseph is serving Potiphar directly. Instead of indirectly just being in the house over business stuff, Potiphar has seen God blessing Joseph, and Potiphar's like, okay, you're going to be directly underneath me. You are serving me directly now, and everything I need you to take care of, you can take care of for me. And so Joseph's now serving Potiphar directly, but not just that. In verse 4, Potiphar makes Joseph overseer over his house. So the word house in the Old Testament, we are talking about the building, but we're also talking about the family and all the other people, servants and such related to that. So Potiphar is basically making Joseph the chief overseer. I don't know if in the Egyptian culture this would include the children, but it definitely includes all the servants. It definitely includes all the business transactions. It definitely includes all his general affairs, not related to being captain of Pharaoh's bodyguard. All the other affairs Joseph is in charge of. And so Potiphar acts wisely here. He sees God blessing Joseph. He puts Joseph at the top and then puts him in charge basically over all the other officials and matters of his house. And then all that he had, he put into his hand. At the end of verse 4, Potiphar also gives Joseph charge of all of his possessions. This shows just how obvious the Lord's blessing was, and it shows that Potiphar believes he can trust Joseph absolutely. Any questions or comments in these first 4 verses?
There's just some neat stuff with this. You could apply a whole lot of principles there of working in a secular setting. You know, you still do your best, you still want. In his prosperity, he made Potiphar prosper. You know,
Absolutely.
that would be one reason. On the secular side, Potiphar says, "Oh, this guy's good for business," but that's how he gains favor. And it wasn't, but because it doesn't say that, you know, Joseph was manipulating. It said God made what he do everything in his hand prosper. And
Yeah.
so it was really the blessing of God. And so anyway, there's a whole lot of interesting things there that I think are.
Absolutely. And go ahead, Steve.
No, I said, like when growing up, too, you know, the skills you experience, you know, and you keep them till they're alive, you know, I hope so, everything. You know what I mean? Have
So-
skills, if you don't have no skills, then you're buried in the ground.
So Joseph's skills were in shepherding. They were nothing to do with managing Potiphar's house. It is very much the Lord blessing him here that leads to this prosperity. And that goes into what Pastor mentioned. We have applications here to the secular workplace, specifically that following the Lord leads to right business practices. And if the business you're working under also has right business practices, it should lead to their prosperity as well through your testimony for the Lord. Yes.
And I'm sure other men get this. But I know working in a secular place, there's also opposition. But they see what you do with that opposition. They see what you do with the mocking. They see what you do. I mean, I was asked, the guy that opposed me, he was the one who was, he sort of worked in a different area, but when he was gonna leave, he asked me, would you like me to recommend you to take my position? And, you know, because, I mean, it was really interesting because it really was surprising because he mocked me a lot publicly even. And yet, when it came to a promotion, he was the one who was gonna ask me to be there. And so I think somewhat of what Joseph did, so that it may have been messy, and that's what I'm saying. You know, there may have been some mess in there, but God was working through all of it.
So Pastor shared an example from his own life where when he was working in a secular workplace, one of the people over him who mocked him publicly also asked to recommend Pastor to take his position when he, I assume, retired, but he could have left the country. Moved on to another company, and Pastor mentioned the turnover here could have been messy, and it would have been because Joseph is not a native Egyptian. He'd be a lower class there, and he's probably been there a lot less than some of the other servants. But nobody can deny what's happening here and how the Lord's blessing. Yes, Steve?
What he was saying, I like what he said because I read that some people like that, that's where they get tortured when they were a child. You know, torture with a child and
So,
acting out, you know, when they get older, like you said.
Uh,
You see it in court a lot, right?
with that, I don't necessarily see a connection there to the scriptural passage. And we will continue, but thank you for all of your insights. So, brings us to verses 5 through 6. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 5 through 6? Go ahead, Tom.
And it came to pass from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. And he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored.
So, right after Potiphar makes this decision to put Joseph in charge of everything, God directly blesses everything that Potiphar has had. Not just everything under Joseph's charge. Now he blesses everything to do with Potiphar for Joseph's sake. And so this apparently was so evident that verse 6, it says in verse 4, all that Potiphar had he put into Joseph's hand. In verse 6, he says he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. So apparently that was on a trial basis. But now he's like, okay, this is perfect. The God who is blessing Joseph is also blessing me now. How much did he leave Joseph in control of everything? To the point where, verse 6, he didn't even know anything he had except for what was on his table that he was eating. Presumably he's with Pharaoh a large amount of the time because he's captain over the guard. He's not in the house very often. But because of this, he's still absolutely trusting everything. It's all going great for him. Once again, Potiphar would be happy with this being a happily ever after ending. So we have God blesses now Potiphar directly because of how Potiphar's treating Joseph. The Bible mentions in verse 5, for Joseph's sake. God's working here for his purposes concerning Joseph. God's working here to accomplish his further purposes in Egypt. And we have the end of verse 6 sets up for verse 7 and what's going to happen. Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. We're talking about his appearance. He was good to look at and well favored in proportion. He was well proportioned and he was handsome. So verse 6 is setting that up to explain what happens in verse 7. Any questions, comments? This definitely goes into what Pastor mentioned with through God working in the lives, in this case of Joseph, but in the life of a believer as well. It can lead to prosperity for a company, or in this case for Potiphar.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking on that phrase for Joseph's sake. Then I wonder if in eternity we'll find out that the biggest companies, the most prosperous companies, I'll just put earthly prosperity, that somehow God was using that because of Christians in that workplace. Or I've always thought, you know, someone works at a certain place, that company prospers so they can give to their local ministry and give to missionaries. And so it's a very secular, the source of the money is very secular, not evil, but earthly.
Yeah.
And that's useful for the work of God, who that company may know nothing about.
So the three companies I know particularly that have that kind of testimony directly are Ford, Heinz, and JCPenney. Each of them to look into that, what God did, how God accomplished things, and for whom, how the money that the businesses made was used. In general, I think of the pastor at the church I attended growing up. He gained his PhD from Dallas Theological Seminary, which is extremely liberal, was even more liberal back at that time because it was before the Southern Baptist Convention restructured. And he said, before going there, I had to ask the PhD head, is this a master's program or a PhD program? He said, what do you mean? Because if it's a master's program and I put direct disagreement with what the professor teaches, I'll be wrong and I will fail. But if it's a PhD program, I put directly against what the professor teaches and can support it, I'll get through with high marks. And he said, it's a PhD program, as long as you can support your disagreements. So he said a lot of my papers were, the professor was completely wrong here for this, this, and this, and I disagree with it. But all that to say, he got through. One of the classes he had to take was a church growth class. And the church growth class was reading basically business books of the world's philosophies to see how these successful principles in business could be applied to a church. And he said, I'm in this class, I'm like, this is the stupidest class ever, because I'm not going to apply worldly principles in my church. And it's like, I got to the first business, which was IBM. I'm like, these are biblical principles here. IBM's prospering because they're following biblical principles. And so it's like, so it's actually a very great set of reports and such for that class I just mentioned. These companies followed these biblical principles here, and God blessed them just like he promised in his word. So, go ahead, Steve.
So I just say an example when you talk about companies that Chris Radio says the Wilson Beach, you know, like you would time this much, and then you got up there, it was 90-10.
Absolutely.
This company went crazy. So,
Yeah.
and the Lord blesses them.
Absolutely. So, brings us to verses 7 through 10. The opposition is not directly the way you would expect, as the Bible records. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 7 through 10? Go ahead, Pastor.
And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master knoweth or wanteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her.
So, came to pass after these things. Everything's going amazing with Joseph. Like I said, apart from knowing what actually happens and how God works through this, Joseph has the highest position in Egypt it's possible for a foreigner to have. Like from human perspectives, he's raised to the highest position. He's the chief servant of one of the most powerful officials in the country, and he has great blessing here. This isn't just making Potiphar rich. Potiphar would be, in effect, raising Joseph's salary. Like, you get the nicest house on my complex of houses. You get all the stuff you want. Just tell me and it's yours. That kind of thing. Chief servants were treated very highly, and Potiphar's advanced him because he's like, this is the best chief servant ever, basically. But now Potiphar's wife wants to be immoral with Joseph. And she sees nothing wrong with this because she's asking him directly publicly, not implying things, just very, very direct. And so she asks him directly, and she gets a direct refusal in verse 8. Now the refusal contains 3 parts. The first part is, Potiphar's done great good for me. He's left everything that he has with me. As Pastor mentioned, the word wotteth, with my master wotteth not what is with me, means knoweth. Because back at the time of the King James, the word wit was a verb. So you had wit, what, and had what. So now we think of wit as how sharp you are in your mind. It used to be a verb. To wit something is to know it really deeply, to use that. And he said he doesn't wit, he can't what is in his house because he doesn't even bother to check. Like, he doesn't know anything because he doesn't even check what's in his house. And so that's the first reason. The second reason is, obviously, you're his wife, meaning you are not part of what I have authority, or not part of anything I've been given, and it's absolutely wrong for me. He doesn't say to do this great wickedness to Potiphar, he says to do this great wickedness and sin against God. So Joseph recognizes, Potiphar's blessed me greatly, you're his wife, and to be immoral with you is to do a great wickedness against God, because just as Potiphar recognizes God has set all of this up and is blessing Joseph and Potiphar, Joseph knows it as well. So he gives a very direct refusal, and he gives his reasons for refusing. It's not just no. He explains each of his reasons for refusing there, and she continues to persist. Verse 10, spoke to Joseph day by day, and he wouldn't, the word hearken not, as he didn't even listen to her. And 2 parts, to be directly immoral, to lie with her, or to be with her. I don't know if he knew whether that would tempt him or not, but at any rate, he's not affecting his testimony at all. He's refusing to even spend time with Potiphar's wife, not just in immoral contexts, in any context. And she's apparently trying everything she can think of to make this happen, and each time he refuses. So, what do we have here? Joseph's keeping his testimony, recognizing how he acts with Potiphar's wife is indicative of his relationship to God and his testimony for God. And so he refuses repeatedly. And Potiphar's wife won't let this go. When I think of why Joseph didn't get executed for what Potiphar thought happened, one of the reasons I can think of is probably everybody in the house, which would not be Potiphar, because as far as we know, he was gone a lot of the time, and she would certainly not be trying to mess around and cause problems while he was there. But it seems like a lot of the others would have been aware of what was happening, of Joseph repeatedly refusing. But all that, it's speculation. The Bible doesn't record. The Bible does record. There was nobody who could blame Joseph for any of his actions. And Potiphar's wife was a very wicked lady. And both of those things are recorded. Any questions or comments here?
Powerful testimony.
Absolutely.
I mean, you think about it, he's got
A wife of him.
no earthly reason as far as, I mean, he was a young man, he was good looking, he was in a foreign country, no family, no, not any of the earthly restraints that he had in a relationship with God.
Absolutely.
And that's still.
Oh, I was trying to think of a verse that would indicate that. And my immediate thought was, God, I think it's God shall keep thee from the immoral woman, I think is how it's written. Something of that sort, the start of Proverbs and the discourse regarding that. The relationship with God is the most important part. So that brings us to verses 11 through 15, yes. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 11 through 15? Okay, I will read verses 11 through 15. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that, I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. So, what happens here? About the same time where she's trying everything she can think of, and he's not even listening with her, not even spending time with her, she sees an opportunity where all the men are gone, so there are no witnesses to what's happening. And so she grabs Joseph's garment. She's the one being forceful. I think of false accusations. In a lot of cases, people can accuse directly of what they themselves are doing. In this case, she's basically accusing Joseph of doing exactly what it was her doing, and it was not him. But so Joseph flees immediately. Notice here, he does not use force. To use force would have given the slander that she's going to do absolute believability, because if he used force to get away, she'd be like, look, he used this force to try to get me to do what he wanted. But there was none there. He just fled. He left his garment. The idea is outer cloak, outer robe is probably a better way to say it. He left that with her and got him out. The idea is fled at once. So Joseph had to be in the house for business. When Potiphar's wife tries to get him to be immoral again, he flees immediately. And verse 13, I think at this point she realizes she's been absolutely rejected, and as she thinks this is Joseph's fault and this is Joseph, so instead of wanting Joseph now, she wants to ruin his life now. And so she's thinking in verse 13 about what to do, how to ruin Joseph's life. So first thought she comes up with in verse 14 is slander. She calls in all the men of the house, which already this is a very questionable situation, because if this had actually happened, you'd be running out to the men of the house, not calling the men in. You would be running out. But she calls them in for the purposes of slander. As far as we know, Joseph is absolutely still not here. She would not have called Joseph in for that. And verse 14, so then she tells a lie. Look, she's slandering not only Joseph, she's also slandering her husband. See, he, meaning my husband, hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. She's, I guess, trusting that they don't like him either, because obviously Joseph is elevated above all of them. So presumably by her mentioning that he's a Hebrew, the rest of them are Egyptians, but that's just a guess. So she's like, look, Potiphar has brought this Hebrew in and raised him all the way up to make fun of us, not just to make fun of you and how you were doing, but to make fun of me too, because look, he was trying to take advantage of me. And when I cried and screamed and there was nobody there, as soon as he heard that, he fled and he left this garment here. That's proof that he's been there. So that's her first thought of how to ruin Joseph's life, is by slander. Any questions or comments here?
I think it's, to me, it's a good testament that saying no would not have been sufficient. He had to physically, he got away from
Yeah.
temptation, from the appearance of evil.
Yes.
It wasn't just simply, no, thank you. He was out of there.
Absolutely. So I'm trying to think if anybody is in a situation that difficult as a believer. I believe God immediately gives wisdom and God immediately gives grace. But basically, he couldn't do anything to Potiphar's first wife directly because she was above him. If they were equals, he could have got her removed. But she was above him. He couldn't do anything directly.
I think of Amnon when he was fighting.
Yeah.
I knew Amnon had a friend, and then I can't remember.
Friend was Jonadab, and let's get there. My mind is thinking Tamar.
That's what I was thinking too.
It's another Tamar.
But when he didn't get what he wanted, then he hated her as much as he loved her. I think the scripture something along.
Yeah. Yes.
And here, Potiphar's wife wanted the other side of the sexual issue. She wanted what she didn't get it, so then she hates him as much as she was longing for him, in a sense, though the word hate's not mentioned there.
It's very clear she's trying to ruin his life. So, with that, a pastor mentioned, just as we see in the example of Amnon and Tamar, one of, I guess, two of David's children, that when Amnon did not receive what he was expecting with his immorality, he hated Tamar just as much as he had loved her. And we see the same thing here with Potiphar's wife. So that brings us to verses 16 through 20. What you've already done isn't enough. So do I have a volunteer to read verses 16 through 20? Go ahead, Steve.
And she laid her in the garden by her until his Lord came back. And he spake there in the prison.
So now Potiphar's wife is going to lie directly to Potiphar. She keeps the garment as evidence until he gets there. And she says the same thing besides directly blaming Potiphar. She's like, look, this servant is trying to even like make fun of me, trying to treat me as nothing. And he knows the implication here. And she said in verse 18, when I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment with me and fled out. So notice the words fled out are the same as the words got him out earlier. It's the idea if he fled at once. When Potiphar hears that, he's very angry. And Joseph is not an Egyptian. He had all the authority to execute Joseph immediately. And the two possibilities here, one is he's showing Joseph mercy for all the good that's happened. He may be scared of what happens to him by the Lord if he deals with Joseph in that way. Or two is he doesn't believe he doesn't believe his own wife here. But what are you going to do? Call your wife a liar directly? Absolutely disgrace her publicly in front of everything. Everybody's going to know what has happened. This becomes even more difficult if the wife is from a powerful family, which is very likely because he's part of the nobility. Like, there's a lot of political things here. So those are the two possibilities. Either he was showing mercy to Joseph and fearing the Lord, or it's because of all the political matters here, he knew this wasn't true, but he had no other action. Either way, he confines Joseph to his political prison. It says, put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. So it's for the Pharaoh himself and for his prisoners. How can Potiphar put somebody into prison where the Pharaoh's political prisoners are? If you look at chapter 40, verse 3, the prison is mentioned as the house of the captain of the guard. Not this is actually Potiphar's house, but it's a building he has authority over into the prison. So part of Potiphar's responsibility as being the captain of Pharaoh's guard is he has authority over this political prison. And so he throws Joseph there. Genesis 43, and there's one other verse as well that references the prison as being under the captain of the guard, which is Potiphar. So by doing this, he gets Joseph out of the situation permanently. If he believed that it was his wife at fault, now he's removed that from her and can look at starting to repair the relationship, so on and so forth. But regardless, Joseph's now in a political prison for doing right instead of for doing wrong. Any questions or comments here?
Would that have been how should we say, because of the people that were in there, a step up from the prison? You understand, it's still
So
confined,
it does not seem like the political prison is horrible. And one of the reasons is when Joseph sees the butler and the baker sad, he knows something's out of the ordinary. So it seems like it's very much a prison, but it's not the most horrible prison ever. Like, it's not like, oh, it's sad because it's horrible here. No, something must be wrong because this is normally maybe boring, but it's not a horrible life. So that is a good comment, Pastor. And so Joseph's in that political prison. Any other comments? We have then verses 21 through 23. Do I have a volunteer? Go ahead, Tom.
But the Lord was with Joseph and shewed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was a doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him. And that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper.
So we have, just as the very start of the chapter mentions in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph when he went to Potiphar's house. The same thing is still true in a political prison. The Lord was with Joseph. And the next part, and showed him mercy. The word there is chesed, which is almost impossible to translate into English. It has the idea of mercy, faithfulness, and loving kindness all in one. It's the strongest possible word used in Hebrew for the way the Lord treats Israel, for the way the Lord treats believers, in this case, for the way the Lord is treating Joseph. Strongest word possible in the goodness of how God is treating him directly. And then we see a direct result of that. He gave him favor in the sight of the prison keeper. So now the prison keeper sees, oh, there's something special about Joseph. What's he going to do? He puts Joseph in charge of all the prisoners in the political prison. Well, how did he put him in charge? The last part of the verse, whatsoever they did there, he was a doer of it. The English here is kind of unreadable. The idea is whatever the prisoners did there, Joseph was responsible for it. Joseph was responsible for all the prisoners' actions. Not that he was the one who did whatever the prisoners did. It was that Joseph was responsible for their actions. And generally, when you put somebody in charge of a prison and make him responsible for all the prisoners' actions, it's because he'd be seeking an excuse to get that person in trouble, because generally you'd expect the prisoner's actions are going to have some problem. Well, God blesses it so much. Verse 23, just as Potiphar didn't even bother checking, the keeper of the prison isn't even bothering to check anything that's happened under Joseph's control, because whatever Joseph was doing, God made it to prosper. So God very powerfully blesses here to the point where the keeper of the prison's like, I don't even need to check what's happening, because if it's with Joseph, it's good. Any questions or comments here? So we will stop with point 6 and point 10, a summary of Genesis 39 and then an application of the patriarch's faith. So Genesis 39 is God continually blessing Joseph in spite of the people around him treating him wickedly. And it shows Joseph's testimony, both to serve Potiphar and the keeper of the prison righteously, but also to live righteously in his morality. Shows all of that. As Pastor mentioned, it's a very strong testimony. Joseph is one of the strongest testimonies in the Bible. And going down to point 10, application of the patriarch's faith. If we think back to what we've covered so far, Abraham, he obeyed God immediately, and most of the trials in Abraham's life were directly brought by the Lord telling him to get up and move, by the Lord telling him to sacrifice his son, by the Lord telling him that, look, you and your wife are going to have a son at the age of 190. Yeah, it's the Lord himself directly testing Abraham's faith and Abraham's obedience. We see Isaac, and we see Isaac consistently trusting and obeying God in peacefulness. Isaac has only one difficulty in his own life, and that's because of his choice with Rebekah, to say that Rebekah was his sister. And the rest of Isaac's life is peaceful, and he obeys the Lord in that. Jacob, he trusts God through all the difficulties caused by his own sin and by the sin of his children. And there's all sorts of difficulties in Jacob's life, all sorts of problems, and they're not, besides Laban, they're not due to anybody else's sin besides sins in his own family that cause those problems. And Jacob still trusts God, and God still protects, preserves him, and works his purposes. And now we see Joseph trusting God in the midst of trials brought on by other people's wickedness. It was his brother's sin that sold him into slavery, and it was Potiphar's wife's sin that led to him being in political prison. We see those four aspects. And if God can be trusted in all of these cases to work out his purposes, we can trust God in every situation of our own life. He is, I was going to say always the answer, but I want a much stronger word. He is always the only person who can work out our lives the way they should be. With that, let's close in prayer. Waiting for a couple people to finish writing. Not a problem. Let's close in prayer. Dear Lord God, I thank you for today and for an opportunity to study the life of Joseph, for the great testimony that he had, and we know that was because of the blessing and the grace you gave him. We thank you for the confidence we have that we can trust you in any situation of our own life. We pray that you would give us the strength and desire to trust you even more. In Jesus' name, amen.